All right, welcome back to the channel. So I'm here today with my boy Luke Feeney, and we're here to answer the question, do combo decks ruin retro Yu-Gi-Oh formats? Because recently, there's been a lot of doom and gloom over the fact that we now have two new combo decks in the format. We have this Forgs deck, which was created by the UK player Alistair, and I believe also piloted by his good friend Adam Sheck. Shout out to those guys. This deck is very broken. I have this as the best deck in the format right now. And then we also have this Gigavice deck, which was built by Marcus Carisse, Marcus LOL on Discord. Very, very powerful. I think that this exact build is not his, but like the concept of playing Gigavice wasn't really a thing, at least not in this turbo iteration until Marcus touched it. People had tried before with like Twilight Rose Knight, Mystic Tomatoes, and they were taking all these half measures, but then it got refined to the super turbo build and the deck started topping now. Like it is actually a threat in the format that you have to worry about when you go to tournaments, which is really scary. And the original combo deck right here, which is Dragon Turbo, this was like the first truly scary deck in the format, in my opinion. The one that made it where like if a bunch of people started playing this deck, Edison format would be in trouble because people do not like playing against something low interactive like this. But Luke, how do you feel about combo decks in retro Yu-Gi-Oh? Do you feel like it defeats the purpose?
It's interesting, I guess. I mean, people play retro Yu-Gi-Oh for different purposes, so I guess it's hard to say it defeats the purpose. Like, to me, like, when I first got into Edison back, when it first started or whatever, kind of getting popular, like, I longed for or missed the days of, like, normal summon back and forth Yu-Gi-Oh, where, like, games would go on for a lot of turns and, like, like, a good, like, torrential or whatever could really mean something and, like, that kind of stuff, where, like, card advantage mattered. And I feel like these decks kind of, like, are trying to circumvent that avenue of gameplay, which... some people like that, but at the same time, I think you can get that a lot. Like the later you go into Yu-Gi-Oh, like more towards like modern Yu-Gi-Oh, like that's kind of what the game is now. Like card advantage isn't really like that, as big of a decider. It's more just like, how many negates can I put on the board turn one and stuff like that, where so that plays more into the combo style. So I feel like there's already an avenue that exists for people to like enjoy combo Yu-Gi-Oh. So like the fact that retro Yu-Gi-Oh is supposed to be like kind of like a little bit of a haven from that is something that I think is kind of getting lost the more prevalent these combo decks get in the format.
When we first started playing Edison back in like 2022, that 2023 era, the game was much slower. And in fact, I want to go all the way back to 2010, the deck that actually won the YCS or won the SJC. This is Jeff Jones' quick draw deck, right? And before this call, you were talking about how turn one, this was like the peak back then. This was like turn one summoning Drill Warrior and having tokens or whatever and looping that over and over again with Dandelion. That was like,
that was considered broken. That was like you were doing it turn one if you did that. That was like, oh my god, like how am I going to win this game? And now you look at the board that Gigavice puts on the board, and they have like 5 dudes, all of which drew a card, and you're like, what are we doing? Like, what is, you know what I mean? It's just, it makes quick draw look like a joke. So.
2-card combo that puts out a bunch of negates and big monsters, and if you don't deal with them, they actually create more card advantage on a following turn. Power Tool and Gigaplant, they're left on the field. They both generate pluses, and they LTK you too. They Colossal Army. All of these decks can weirdly like either Colossal Army you or kill you in a way that Gores doesn't matter. Like even Dragon Turbo, they have Quacky Mirror Drago. They have certain kills through Gores anyway, even if you haven't. They don't have this guy.
Yeah, I think Trident Dragon is like a thing you can kill through Gores with that. Like there's a lot of I mean these decks are very, very ignorant when it comes to like playing defense. Like
they just crush it.
I don't know about Battle Fader, but through Gores has fallen off. Like his stock has gone way down in Edison format in recent times. And like I used to really fear Gores when we first got into Edison format. Same. That was like a that was a big swing. So the fact that he's kind of lost his shine is, says a lot.
Yeah, the only deck that I think Gores is really good against right now is Value Turbo. And if you catch like an unsuspecting, I don't know, Mock and Control player or something, they attack with Fortress directly and you drop Gores, that can be really good. But when it comes to like, even against GBs, like Gores is historically bad against GBs, it's bad against Gigavice, it's bad against Forgs, it's bad against Dragon Turbo. And I just named 4 of the best decks in the format, really. So it's like, at that point, if Gores is becoming not really good anymore, that tells you a lot about where we are. Also, just in general, things like setting monsters feels way worse because of just how fast the decks are coming at you. Like you spending a turn to set Raikou or Hamster, especially imagine going second and your opponent's like summon Swap Frog, send Treeborn Frog to the grave, set a back row or two.
You go, set Raiko, go. Yeah, that's just it's not a good feeling. I was going to talk about that because I remember when I first got into Farm, one of the first decks I played was Fairies, which that deck is entirely normal summons almost. And you could like just set a DD Warrior Lady and pass, but you do that these days, you just get like absolutely OD'd on. Like that is not like a line of defense really.
Yeah,
like
it's
one
not at
monster all. So.
And so in terms of like the question, do these decks ruin Yu-Gi-Oh format, or Yu-Gi-Oh retro formats? Like you said, people play for different reasons, and I think that is never going to change. There are people who just want to win, and they don't care about like if other people are having fun or how much interaction they have while they're doing it, right? Like if they want to win, if they feel like Forgs or Gigavice or Dragon Turbo is the best way to win, or maybe that is literally what they find fun. There are people like that. I mean, Alistair even says it in the Discord all the time when people talk about how do you feel playing a deck where there's really no interaction between you and your opponent? You're just trying to always OTK them and essentially play Solitaire. The only interaction really is that they put a monster in attack mode. And if they didn't, if they left their field completely open, it's all the same really. So at the end of the day, you are playing by yourself. But he says confidently, like, I don't care if my opponent's having fun. And I don't fault him for that. I don't really judge him for that because I've played Yu-Gi-Oh for so long. I've played with every kind of player, and I've come across people like him who have that mentality of like, I'm not trying to interact necessarily. I'm trying to get the W and move on. 2-0 and a handshake is great for me. I don't care how I get it. And so again, you're allowed to do that. Like there's nothing in the rule book saying that you can't kill your opponent as soon as possible, or you can't do something that makes it where they can't play the game. And even when I think about Yu-Gi-Oh at a high level in every single format, especially the ones that are revisited, the peak of every format is to try to prevent your opponent from playing the game. If we go back to Teledad format, at the end of Teledad, people were summoning big monsters and setting Royal Oppression. That was the end of Teledad. If you look at Dragon Ruler format, the peak of Dragon Ruler format was summoning big monsters and setting Vanity's Emptiness. And if you look at Kashtira format, the peak, if you look at that, remember that screenshot where Dominic Couch literally locked, I think, all of his opponent's zones, spell and trap card zones and monster zones. He locked every zone except one. So his opponent was only allowed to use one zone because Kashtira locked every single other zone. So his opponent couldn't play the game. And that is in the finals of a YCS. It was a 3v3 YCS, I'm pretty sure. It was one of the ones that Silverman won with Couch, but in that screenshot, you can see like his opponent can't do anything. He has one zone, and I forget if it's a monster zone that he left open or it was a spell and trap card zone, but it didn't matter.
Yeah, but either way, you can't play the game with one zone. Like it's just not like there are 10 zones or whatever for a reason, right?
Exactly.
However many zones.
Yeah, you take all his zones away, the guy can't play, and then Pepe Bosch, same thing. You have like a field of Cyber Dragon Infinity. You search out with Ariadne a bunch of counter traps, Solemn Strike, Solemn Warning, whatever Solemns, and then you set them all and you tell your opponent to go, and they try to do the same thing back to you, and as soon as they Pendulum Summon, you go Solemn Strike and they lose the game. So this is not some unique problem to retro Yu-Gi-Oh, but like you said in the very beginning, Luke, you could just play modern Yu-Gi-Oh if combo decks are what you want to do, and there's more prestige to that also. Like there's just more prestige if that's your goal. Like some people play because they want the accolades or whatever like that.
Yeah, they want the cloud or whatever. Yeah, for sure. Like I think, like winning like a modern YCS where there's more competitors and more stakes or whatever. Well, maybe not more stakes, honestly, arguably, depending on the pricing. But, that definitely has more prestige and holds more weight to most people. So if that's your goal, then, why not do that, I guess.
Yeah, and the combo decks are more consistent. That's the fact of the matter. Edison is a format where even these combo decks, they, as powerful as they are pretty inconsistent. Like I think Forgs is a bit of a different case because this one is not as inconsistent as the other two, like Gigavice and Dragon Turbo brick way more. I think that because the Forgs deck plays a bunch of cards that are independently good, which is what you need to make a deck really toxic, Swap Frog is just a good card. So is Duke Frog.
You have a good fallback plan. Like if you don't have like full combo right, you can still just play like a normal Frog game for a little bit, and that's going to buy you a little bit of time against a lot of opponents. Whereas if you break on Dragon Turbo, like you are not playing a card that game, like you lost. Like,
you're just gonna attack. You're just gonna attack like, really quick.
You're gonna maybe like set a White Stone or something and pass, and then you're gonna die. And that's have fun. Yeah.
But yeah, I think it's interesting because I think two things can be true. So people often say, oh, this problem isn't as big as people are making it out to be. Everyone is kind of just doom and glooming it and exaggerating the issue. And I think that, sure, it might be overblown with representation. Like when you go to a tournament, you don't play against all combo decks. You don't play every round against Forge, Gigavice, and Dragon Turbo. That is a fact. So in a sense that people are saying Edison is all combo decks that don't interact, that is a false narrative, and that is definitely exaggerated. However, the second point though, and I think this is also true, it doesn't need to be super represented for it to be unpleasant all around. Because when people think about playing a format, if their interaction at some point is, I didn't do anything that set and I lost the game, they will remember that. And it could happen once in a tournament, twice in a tournament, but if it happens at any point, it leaves a sour taste in your mouth and it makes you not even want to play. And Luke, you can speak to this because since these decks have come out, you've been very vocal about how you do not really want to play Edison anymore, right?
Yeah, like last year I got pretty into Edison again, like with you guys, and I traveled to events and stuff and had a lot of fun playing with my friends, and like I did pretty well, like I topped 2 events or whatever. So like, I mean, I think like, you know, I knew the format well at the time, but since these decks have come out, I've played the format and played some like casual matches with Gary and people in the house and stuff, and every time I run up against these decks, either on ladder or like in those matches, like I just don't really enjoy the kind of gameplay that they are encouraging or creating or whatnot. Like, you know, I don't know. It's just not. It's basically not why I signed up to play Edison again, and not what drew me to the format in the first place. So since these decks have come out, I really haven't had much fun playing Edison. So I've kind of just stopped playing as much, which, you know, like Frazier said, maybe that's not super widespread at this moment, but I think the more negative experiences that these decks create for people, the more they'll have that like sour taste in their mouth, and maybe, you know, people will stop playing or playing as much or playing as often, or maybe they just won't travel to events or whatever the case might be, right? So it's definitely something to keep your eye on, because like even if the meta share isn't overwhelming, like there have been plenty of decks or like cards in other games that I know that have been banned, not because they win, you know, 100% of the time, but because they create really bad game experiences, whether that be, you know, dragging the game on like indefinitely, like they create basically like unwinnable game states for both parties where like you just go to time, or whether that be the game ends turn 1. So
yeah, and to kind of compare this to another game that's going through a similar problem, Smash Bros. Ultimate, I love Super Smash Bros. They have a character, Steve. Some of you might know about this already, but Steve is really detrimental to the overall fun that the player base has. And it's like that character existing because he's so broken, and because he's playing his own game, he creates platforms in a game of platform fighters, which is like, you know, most stages are banned because of the layout. Steve can create layouts that are literally banned, right, from other stages, which kind of defeats the purpose of even having stage selection where you're only limited to a couple stages. If this character can just create them and create scenarios that do not exist otherwise, the character is so ridiculous. And a lot of people feel like the people who play, you know, that character are carried and the best player in the world. You know, it goes back and forth between like Spargo or Akola, but really it's Akola, and it's been Akola for multiple years. Spargo's only had it once now, and he just plays Steve. Like the best player in the world just plays Steve, and a lot of people are picking up Steve, and it's getting worse. And what also happens is when you get to a top 8 in Smash, people see Steves in the top 8 and they immediately get annoyed. They get bored. They stop watching the stream.
Turn off the stream. Yeah, I was gonna say exactly.
Especially when they make it.
Has been struggling a bit lately.
It has, especially when it makes it to grand finals and there's a Steve in the grand finals. People are just like, I do not want to watch this. Like, there's nothing, you know, that represents Smash Bros to me about this match. Like, I don't want to see this. I don't want to see this character create a wall behind him when he's at 150, you know, health. And people have the same type of sentiment when it comes to watching these OTK decks over and over again. Whether they have to play against them or just watch them is not really fun. Like, if I'm streaming and there's a bunch of Frog OTK and like Gigavice and Dragon Turbo, people in the chat are talking about how, God, that was cancerous, or that was awful, or, you know, must be nice, like Edison format is so good, or play Edison format, it's an escape from modern, right? And then you see that happen, and it's like, is it really an escape though? Like, if this is happening in both formats now, like, it's not really an escape. Like, I can't set a monster and not die. And that's the thing I used to always say about Edison. I used to literally tell people, if you are tired of setting a trap and dying, or setting a monster, or the idea of even setting a monster gets you killed in modern, go to Edison. And now I can't really say that. I feel bad that people might have listened to me and come into Edison format and they're setting Raiko and then dying, like literally just losing
like
the game.
Hamster, GK Spy, like these monsters used to be like, you know, +1s, they were pretty good or whatever, and these days you just really don't see them as often, so it's, you know, it's tough. Another thing I was going to talk about is, like, we kind of talked about this lately in a bunch of our videos, but like mirror matches in general in Yu-Gi-Oh! Are generally pretty toxic, and these combo deck mirror matches are no exception, because a lot of times in a lot of card games, like in Magic, there's sort of this expression about combo mirror matches being like ships passing in the night, where like you're not really like, you're just trying to see who could go faster, basically. Yes. Like who could go by the other one faster. You're not trying to like, you know, stop them or like impede them in any way. You're just like racing them pretty much, which is how a lot of combo mirrors feel, especially because Edison, unlike Modern, doesn't have, you know, an array of hand traps that are like, you know, handmade to stop these combos like throughout the Yu-Gi-Oh's history, right? Like, you know, some hand traps, like, you know, cards like DD Crow exist and stuff, but one DD Crow against these decks is kind of like a joke. Like, I think I've heard you say, like, I wouldn't even advise siding DD Crow against like Fords or whatever.
Yeah, I think it's bad. I do not. A lot of times, especially because they often side into the transformation side deck. So it's like you'll have Crow waiting for a Fishborg, and the best you'll get is a Treeborn Frog. But to be clear, that is a -1 when you Crow Treeborn Frog, and you're playing against a deck that's still running 3 Salvage, 3 Pot Avarice, and like has sided into.
And there's a second Treeborn waiting. So,
there's a second one too, so you need 2 Crows for it to matter. They side into Monarchs and Breakers and stuff, which are all like +1 cards in this deck. And so then you have Crows against what is essentially a Dream Frog deck. And I don't think that Crow is very good against standard Frog decks, to be honest. So, you know, it's a catch-22. You also are not sure if they're going to side deck into the transformation version, so they might actually keep in the combo, and that's scary as well, because you might be siding things for like the transformation, and then it's like, damn, he actually kept in the combo, and now I got OTK'd anyway through my pulling the rug, because pulling the rug doesn't do anything to the combo.
I was gonna say, yeah, pulling the rug was the card that stuck out to me the most when you said that, because like if you're expecting 3 Kaias, you're like, I'll side pulling the rug, but then they just don't side in the Kaias, and then you're pulling the rug does like basically nothing. So.
Yeah, and then the other problem is, in general, the counterplay to the combo decks. We could talk about that. The counterplay is really bad. Like the suggestions that I saw from top players, and this is coming from basically like Sizzle is one of the people he made a whole video about top cards to side against Gigavice, and I like the video. I think it's a great video because he kind of tiers like all the cards that you could put against it. And one of the top cards was Morphing Jar #2. If people don't know, Morphing Jar #2 just shuffles back all monsters on the field, and then your opponent has to basically mill until they can reproduce that same number of monsters from their deck. Level 4 or lower though. So Gigavice,
yeah, I think it's like normal summonable monsters. So it's
yes.
like, yeah. So in the Gigavice deck, when we look at this deck list, you know, there aren't too many normal summonable
There's only 10.
monsters.
There's only 10 monsters in their whole deck. So the idea is that it can deck them out or whatever. But my problem with that is you're siding that for literally one matchup. I hate that in a format that has literally 20 decks that people might be playing at any given time. Like it just feels bad to have to side something so narrow like that. Against a matchup that you might not go against, right? You don't know which of these combo decks you're going to play against in a tournament. Morphing Jar #2 is not that it's like bad against this deck, but one, you have to draw it after they go off, which is already weird. Like you have to have it after they've already made their ignorant ass board. And I can't speak to like, oh, what outs do they have for it? Because I'm not the Gigavice expert or whatever. I'm sure that those people have probably come up with ways to play around Morphing Jar #2 or whatever, but that's not even the point. The point is that if people feel pressured to have to side deck these ass cards like Morphing Jar #2 because this deck is represented, that is just really bad, especially if this becomes more of a prevalent deck in the meta. I mean, then you're just siding these really weird cards. People talking about Chain Disappearance against Forgs, and I think Chain Disappearance, while it is good against Forgs, it is bad against every other Frog deck. It's just not very good, and that's a whole different discussion, but Chain Disappearance is just not very good against Frogs in general. So you're just left with all these catch-22s. Like if you side these cards, you know, your side deck might not be able to cover the other matchups that are prevalent as well, like Machina and Blackwing and Vayu and Lightsworn, and you know, the list goes on, Hero Beat, etc.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are certain cards that can like apply to multiple combo decks. Like I think like Lightning Vortex, for example, is like pretty decent against all the decks, but it's never really like game in the same way that like Morphing Jar #2 might be game against you know, against Gigabyte. So you're like siding kind of like a mid card as opposed to like going all out, I guess, and then that might not even be good enough. So
yeah, counterplay is a big part in not making things feel completely hopeless, because even in Modern, right, outside of things like D-Shifter and Draw and Lockbird, stuff like that, things that just put a conditional in the game once it resolves, and that's just it. Like once the condition's on the game, you're just stuck with that situation. They have Lightning Storm and Twin Twister and Galaxy Cyclone or Cosmic Cyclone. They have all these cards that can kind of deal like evenly matched, right? All these cards that can kind of deal with ignorant setups and floodgates and things like that. But then Edison doesn't have a lot of that type of stuff. So once people make boards, like turn 1, Power Tool, Gigaplant, Titanial is crazy in Edison. Like that is a crazy, that not even just turn 1. Let me rephrase that. At any point in Edison format, if your opponent goes Power Tool, Gigaplant, Titanial, that is a crazy board.
To break that and win from that spot. Like it's a big board.
And the problem is, that field, if you don't break it, you lose. And I think that's like the thing. It creates a field that's unlike just summoning Absolute Zero with Miracle Fusion. Because, you know, I'm a lover of Hero Frogs, and my biggest play is basically summoning Absolute Zero, maybe having a dupe block with it or whatnot. But like, there's so many things that can get through that. One, just at False Nina, honestly, I've been caught by that so many times, and it's a very simple out that everyone used to side deck. But now, if you kind of like set a monster in pass against that field, they create 2 more pluses. The Power Tool goes off again, the Gigaplant goes off again. Now you're facing a Stardust plus another guy, so then they have 5. That 3 became 5, and it's just crazy.
Yeah, it's a snowball effect, right? It's
Snowball.
what you talked about with the redo format video where it's like it's kind of like leaving his mighty on the field. Like you can't just let that detach again. Like that's gonna end up losing you the game one way or another. And they basically have their own mighty on the field at that
Yeah,
point.
it really is what it feels like. I used to also say the same thing about Fall Troll back when it had Dark Soul and the full package, like when X Sabers became really, really broken. If somebody summoned Fall Troll and you couldn't immediately clear it, you just lost. You're not going to win the game when they just have a plus generating monster in the field like that. Like that guy just generates a +1 every turn, and he's also huge, and he takes your hand away essentially with the stuff that he does. It's kind of the same thing. Like you just get run over, steamrolled because of the snowball effect.
Yeah, it's it's a tough situation all around because like I think Edison still is a fun format. People still enjoy playing it. It's just these things are concerning long term for the health of the format. I guess that's all.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I think while it may be overblown that every round you play is not going to be against a combo deck, hopefully, even still, it does deteriorate the format, and we have to be honest about that. Like you have to be honest about the fact that combo decks in general, and this isn't even really a specific to Edison problem. I think any format where combo decks become too prevalent or become like more consistent, more powerful overall, they get refined, you're just looking at an unpleasant format. For example, we don't revisit the toxic formats in Yu-Gi-Oh! Like we don't play, people don't really go out of their way to play Dragon Rulers. Like I'm looking at format library and stuff like that, and the communities for those toxic formats are so tiny because of that exact reason. Like people are not rushing to play Pepe format again, where winning the die roll is like 90% of the match, or 99% of the match, honestly, because going first in that format is golly. But like all the formats where combo decks that are super broken are just the best deck, people are not exactly rushing to play them. Like people are not trying to play Scientist FTK format because it's like, all right, he won a die roll, he did his Scientist thing, and I lost the game. Like that's not exactly my idea of fun.
Right. That's not. Yeah. It's not like same thing with the Frog OTK format or any of those kind of formats.
Right.
It's like,
why are we not just playing the format after this, right? Where you could just play full on Mash Driver and Frogs, right? Like at that point.
Exactly. Just get it over with. Like why make me sit around and wait? Just
like why do people not play the Shining Darkness format? The format right after this when Ronin Tonin comes out. Why are we stopping at Edison if you want to, kind of play in that world? The reason is because people do want the interaction that Edison and formats like it have to offer, where it's a little bit slower of a game. It's different from Modern in that sense, because again, in Modern, the name of the game is to just blow your load and tell your opponent to deal. Oftentimes they cannot, because you either have your own hand traps or your own negates set up, and that is the game that they're playing. And I think that Modern is probably the correct way to do that because it's more consistent. And there's like a lot more, you're going to play against combo basically every round.
Yeah, you're mean decking hand traps to counterplay the combo decks because you know that if you go second, you lose if you don't have something. Like you're just like gonna get OD'd on basically. So yeah, no, for sure. I mean, I think like also one of the big selling points of Edison historically has been its diversity, right? And like we said, right now the meta share for these decks might not be that high, but I think if people feel like only certain decks are viable into these decks, or that they themselves have to play these decks to have the best chance of winning, because nobody, I mean, maybe there's, I should say nobody, but a lot of people don't have fun when they're losing constantly, right? So if people want to win, that's more fun experience generally than losing. So if they're like, playing their pet deck and just getting smashed by these decks over and over, they're gonna, give up playing that deck eventually. And then that's gonna sort of harm the diversity of the format over time as well. So
agreed.
It's it's interesting to be sure. Yeah. And I mean, to be clear, there's a lot of, historical formats in Yu-Gi-Oh! That, like you said, combo decks are either prevalent or maybe they weren't prevalent, but they should have been, right? Like, I think, like,
right.
I don't remember what format it was, but, like, there was, like, some Gishby FTK deck that was, like, pretty good in some format that, like, only, like, Alan Pennington figured out at the end of the format. But, like, people could have just been doing that the whole time. And I'm sure if you, like, revisited that format, like, that deck would probably be, like, really strong or whatever. But that doesn't make that format good.
Right. Yeah. And the same is true about Frog OTK format, like actual, well, Frog FTK, I should say. The format after this one, after Edison, people didn't know how good Frog FTK was for a while. By the time we caught on, it was already like the kind of the end of the format anyway. So luckily, it didn't last that long, but it could have gone from YCS Virginia, I'm pretty sure, is when you could first play like Infernity Barrier, Dark Soul, and more importantly, Ronin Tonin. That event was won by fucking Gadgets. I think Peter Cheng won that event with Gadgets. In second place, I think was Infernity with Stephen Harris. But if everyone knew that Frog FTK was a deck, that event and every event after that would have been really, really bad. And Yeah, we're just kind of lucky that people didn't know. But we're talking about retro formats, and in retro formats, we have all the time in the world to figure out what was toxic and what's the best way to like win. Usually in Yu-Gi-Oh, unfortunately, the best winning deck and the deck that doesn't allow your opponent to interact as much are the same deck a lot of times.
Right.
But I'd
mean,
even
if your
argue.
game plan doesn't care about their, I was gonna say, if your game plan doesn't care about their game plan, that is inherently powerful, because like then you don't care about like bracket luck. You don't care about what matchup you're playing. Like you always have some avenue to win, no matter what they're doing, because your deck's just so inherently powerful. Like we talk about decks like, you know, GBs, which GBs is like pretty decent right now because it's decent against these style decks and like combo decks, you know, historically because of Chariot and stuff. But you know, GBs kind of has that matchup luck element where it's like, oh, you could just play against, you know, literal hero beat 3 times and you like probably aren't winning 2 of those 3 times. So,
and to be clear, when GBs plays against these decks too, the 3 combo decks here, it also just gets destroyed by these as well. Like, make no mistake, if these decks win the die roll against you, you know, that turn 1 could be disastrous for you. Like turn 1, Lone Fire, any kind of way to get the Lone Fire, because there's multiple, but any kind of way to get the Lone Fire and equip it, even just Lone Fire into Titania is broken. But if they do that Lone Fire into Supervise thing, you're fucked.
Yeah, GBs are not beating that.
Yeah, Titanio, Gigaplant, Power Tool Dragon turn 1, and I'm doing more of it next turn. If I know you're playing GBs, I could even go for Stardust Dragon. Like Dragon Turbo, once you know you're playing against GBs, turn 1, if you have a red med in your hand, instead of like waiting to OTK, you just start summoning it turn 1. You just turn 1, summon debris, bring back a guy, banish, summon red med,
Blue Eyes, or
summon
whatever.
Blue Eyes, and you're just like, all right, I'm just putting this out turn 1 because what the fuck are you going to do about it? You're playing GB. So it's like,
yeah, you better have like Rescue Cat Test Tiger or something. Like better be your hand.
Right.
So,
and even then, a lot of times I notice that when you do break these boards, you're down so bad in card advantage, and these decks have very good resilience too, which is interesting. Like they typically, this deck rejuves, so they can put out that board of like red mat turn 1 and Blue Eyes or whatever, and then when the infinite, they draw a bunch of cards.
5.
Yeah, then they just have a full hand and a field. You know, this deck, same thing. Like they'll have a grip, they'll have a hand, and they'll have the 3 monsters out that become more cards on the following turn. And just realistically, no way you're breaking all that turn 1. And then Forks, same thing. Like they could turn 1 Stardust with double Dupe Frog and Flip Flop Frog, and have cards in hand and a Treeborn coming back and be like, all right, go ahead, play. So it's all just like, yeah, and obviously
when you lay it out like that, it's just
yeah, because I want people to think that like, oh, if I just play GVs, like I'm good. No,
I'm not trying to say.
No, I know you're not.
GVs, like I'm a big advocate of GVs, but even I would tell you that I've played GVs against these matchups, and like it's not an auto win by any means.
No.
Like, it's really not.
The only saving grace is that these decks tend to not play real defense, or at least enough of it, so that way your most important thing, which is tagging out, happens basically every turn, and that's something that you can't say against decks that play like 3D Prison, Double Bottomless, you know, all that stuff.
Right.
But yeah, that's I feel like we did a good job of talking about this
topic.
topic.
We covered everything really that we wanted to cover. You know, yeah, I think so.
Yeah, let us know what you guys think about this whole topic of combo decks in retro Yu-Gi-Oh. Do you hate their existence? Do you feel like Edison and formats that have these types of decks are a bit unpleasant or unfun to play, and it kind of defeats the purpose? Do you feel like those players should go to modern Yu-Gi-Oh? Or do you feel like, you know, it's fine, we'll just deal with it and adapt to it? At one point, I know that everyone started main decking Deck Devastation Virus. That became the meta last year, and it was like, in my opinion, I think that shit is really bad too. Like, I do not like the idea of multiple decks maining DDV. I think that if that's a correction for another problem, then that's a really fucking bad correction, because that card is toxic as hell. Like,
yeah, that's I agree with you there fully. I think the viruses in general in most retro Yu-Gi-Oh formats were pretty underplayed, and I think if they had been played more, there's a good chance you would have seen them on the Forbidden Limited list at some point. But people just didn't really know like how powerful the viruses in general were. So
yeah, I'm not a fan of DDV in general. Like, I think that card is also bad. So if you remove all the combo decks, like if you go back to 2024 before we had Forgs and Gigavice running around as much as we do now, and you just have a DDV meta, it's like, that's also not good. Like that meta is not good either. Getting DDV'd and revealing your hand to your opponent for the next 3 turns is fucking ass. I'm being factually, that shit is ass. So anyways, guys, let me know what you think. Like, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff. We'll catch you in the next one. Peace.